Thank you for joining us. This is our fifth session out of six that we've been having this spring with our HSC Nutritional Sciences students. Really helps us to kind of kick off and celebrate National Nutrition Month in March. So it takes March through April that we have a lot of great opportunities with Dr. Elliott's students to cover a variety of nutrition topics. This one today, surviving your kitchen, the importance of food safety at home. So really interested in what the students will be covering today. We have Luke, Mariana, and Kaiten with us today. So thank you guys for joining.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. As she already mentioned, I'm Mariana Garcia. This is Luke Essery, and this is Kaiten Wilmoth. And today we will be presenting Surviving Your Kitchen, the importance of food safety at home.
The objectives for today are explaining the importance of proper food storage and handling, applying good personal hygiene practices to prevent contamination, and identify correct internal cooking temperatures for different food products.
So I'm going to give us a brief overview of our food safety topics we want to cover today. First, we're going to do an introduction into food safety and why it's important, personal hygiene practices, the types of food contaminants, food storage practices, thawing and cooking methods, and ways to hold foods safely. So first, I want to start us off with a brief quiz for everyone to take on Kahoot. So this will let us know what you already know about food safety and cooking. So you'll see we have go to kahoot.it on our slide. If you can open up either on your computer, on another tab, or whatever device you're using, or on your cell phone, just type into your search bar online, kahoot.it, and then we will pull up a game pin for you to enter when you're prompted.
Which meat has the highest internal cooking temperature? Correct answer is chicken, and this is because chicken has a bacteria known as salmonella in it, and it requires a high temperature to ensure absolute safety.
All right, good job, Maggie. Okay, our second question is, what is the bacteria of concern for ground beef? Okay, great job. The answer is E. coli. So E. coli is one we want to be concerned about for ground beef and make sure that we store and handle it properly and then cook it to the required temperature.
Our third question is, what is the best way to prevent viral contamination? Here, the correct answer would be practicing good personal hygiene. And this is because with viral contamination, we can't really kill it through high heat as we would with bacteria. So this is why it would be the correct answer here.
All right, next is, what is the temperature danger zone? All right, great job. Everyone knew that. So yeah, the temperature danger zone is where bacteria can live and grow rapidly, and we'll talk more about it during this presentation.
which is not a time/temperature control for safety food. So the correct answer here is bread, and this is because cup, melon, baked potatoes, and milk all have bacteria associated with these foods that can thrive if they are not at certain temperatures to control the bacteria.
What is the recommended temperature for water? washing? Correct answer here is going to be 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And I know that sometimes that can sound a little high, but this is because it is good to remove the germs and the oils off of our hands without creating that discomfort and irritation to our skin.
All right, when should someone be excluded from handling food? So these are symptoms. All right, so the answer here is jaundice because it is a sign of hepatitis A, which is a pretty contagious and serious virus that can be transferred through food. With sore throat, fever, and fatigue, people with those should be restricted in their food handling and should be cautious, but we really want to keep people with jaundice completely away. And that looks like yellow skin and yellow eyes. I found this.
What part of the meat should you test with the thermometer? Good job. So yes, the center or the thickest part of the meat, this is because this is the part of meat that will take the longest to cook and to the longest to meet a certain temperature and kill our bacteria of concern.
What happened here?
We're gonna change the screen one more time. Share screen, new share.
I don't know what happened. Can you move this? Sorry, I don't know what happened. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. It shows it's already sharing.
Is that not it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We
I
wanted
have
to,
one question.
we wanted to.
Oh, you wanted to go back to Kahoot?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Isn't that weird? Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks
and-
for hanging with us there.
Sorry about that. And then we're on to our last question,
Two.
or our last two questions.
So what temperature is known as the danger zone for food? We're back to the temperature danger zone again for this one. All right, yeah, so the correct answer here is 41 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. A way to remember this is also just thinking 40 to 140. So this is like the temperature where bacteria can thrive and grow rapidly, like we mentioned before. And we typically see our refrigerators kept below 41, and we cook our meats and other foods to higher than 135. Sabrina is pulling ahead. Great job.
And for our last question, ready-to-eat pre-cooked food should be stored where? Orange were neck and neck. So this is going to be stored in the top shelf of the fridge, and this is because ready to eat and pre-cooked foods, we don't want them to be in the middle or bottom shelf, as the name implies, they're ready to eat. So we don't want any raw meats maybe getting dripping or anything onto the ready to eat pre-cooked foods, as this can lead to cross-contamination and bacterial infections.
See the
The
winners.
podium.
Good job, Laura. Okay.
Okay. And now to continue our presentation, why is food safety important and why are we discussing it with you today? So just in the United States alone, 48 million people fall ill, 128,000 people are hospitalized, and 3,000 people die every year from a foodborne illness alone. And this can be pretty scary and alarming statistics. Those that are most at risk are going to be children that are pregnant. Children, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. The most at risk are going to be children, pregnant women, and elderly adults, and people who are immunocompromised. However, amidst these alarming statistics, by implementing and adhering to proper food safety practices, we have that power to help prevent these illnesses, and especially if we are cooking at home. So today we're going to discuss some strategies that you can implement in your own home and help you survive your kitchen. So the first way that we're going to talk about is personal hygiene. It's one of the most simplest and most effective ways that we can prevent these illnesses. And I know it may sound silly that I'm here presenting a slide to adults about how to properly wash their hands, but food safety really begins with proper hand washing, because our hands can easily transfer harmful bacteria and contaminants from various sources, making hand hygiene a crucial first line of defense against these foodborne illnesses. And to be able to practice this, we are wanting to first wet our hands and arms, and that water should again be 100 degrees, at least 100 degrees Fahrenheit, as this temperature range is effective for removing dirt, oils, and germs from the surface of our hands, and it also helps to prevent discomfort or skin irritation. Then we're going to want to apply soap, creating good lather, and then scrubbing vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds to make sure that we're taking time out to scrub every part of our hands, ensuring that we're cleaning under the fingernails to help remove, again, that dirt and oil, as it can kind of harbor that, and between the fingers. Then we're going to rinse off all the soap under clean running water to remove any dirt and soap off. And then finally, we're going to dry our hands thoroughly with a single-use paper towel or a hand dryer to make sure we're completely drying our hands, as moisture can harbor bacteria. For this process to be effective, it should be at least 20 seconds. And we also have to keep in mind, in addition to these steps of washing our hands, that we want to wash them after using the restroom, handling raw foods, touching our body or our hair, sneezing or coughing, handling chemicals, and taking out the trash. Other ways we can practice good personal hygiene and prevent infection transmission is by following some key guidelines. According to ServSafe, and if you're unfamiliar with ServSafe, it's a food and beverage safety training, and they're the ones that provide certificates to restaurants so that they are allowed to serve people. But according to them, we should avoid handling food if they are experiencing fever or sore throat, but should be excluded from coming into contact with food if they are experiencing diarrhea, vomiting, or jaundice, as we mentioned, the CAHOO, as these are more serious symptoms of an infectious condition. We also want to apply bandages and wear gloves to cover any wounds to ensure that any bodily fluids are prevented from contacting our food or any contact surfaces that our food will be on. And then going along with this, we want to make sure that we are washing our hands or changing gloves whenever we are switching tasks or handling different types of food to minimize that cross-contamination. We also want to reinforce these measures by regularly cleaning and sanitizing our food preparation services or any utensils or equipment we're using to prevent that cross-contamination and that likelihood of transmitting bacteria. Next, we will talk about food contaminants and the role in the development of foodborne illnesses. When discussing contamination, it's essential to understand its various forms and the potential risks that it poses to food safety. It encompasses the presence of harmful organisms, substances, or contaminants that can compromise the safety and the quality of food products. There are three main types that we're going to discuss with you today, and it's going to be physical, bacterial, and viral. Each poses a serious risk to human health when present in our food, and it increases the risk of foodborne illnesses or harm. So what are physical contaminants? They're going to be foreign objects or materials that get into our food products or substances. They can be things such as like metal, broken glass, hair, or dirt, and they can cause harm by causing cuts or dental damage and choking. Injuries can be mild to fatal depending on the contaminant and location of the injury, which can occur in the mouth or the GI tract where we're eating. And ways we can prevent these physical contaminants from entering our food is by regularly checking our equipment for damage, maintaining a clear workspace, and then inspecting food, tying back our hair, and removing jewelry before we're preparing food and while we are cooking our own food.
The second kind of contaminant we're going to talk about is bacteria. So bacteria are microorganisms like Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria that can contaminate food and grow rapidly in it. They cause illness by producing waste products called exotoxins or by releasing parts of their cell walls, which would be called an endotoxin, into the host during digestion. So these can create an immune response in our body, and they can cause issues ranging from GI distress to paralysis, and just about anything you can think of in between. Preventing bacteria from spreading and contaminating our food is going to include washing our hands, separating raw meat from ready-to-eat foods, cooking foods to safe temperatures, using proper storage techniques, and just ensuring that we are still practicing good hygiene. So in this presentation, we are going to teach you how to enact these prevention tips to keep you and your family safe when you're cooking at home. Another class of contaminant is viruses. So viruses are infectious agents that replicate inside host cells and can live on surfaces in the kitchen and on foods. So they cause illness by transferring into a host when they're ingested, and then they replicate using the host cells to further their DNA. Prevention for viruses, like we mentioned before, is really focused on personal hygiene, as they cannot be destroyed by normal cooking temperatures. And the key thing to remember here is not to handle food for others when you're feeling sick. And that includes vomiting, diarrhea, fever, or flu-like symptoms, as these can indicate things like the norovirus and rotavirus, which can contaminate and spread through food and cause those foodborne illnesses. And additionally, like we've mentioned, if someone has yellow skin or eyes, that is called jaundice, and it's a serious sign of hepatitis A, which is a contagious virus that can contaminate food or water. Next, we're going to talk about food storage and ways that we can store food safely to minimize contamination with all three of these. So a key thing with ServSafe that they talk about is time and temperature control foods. Excuse me. So time and temperature control foods are foods that can harbor harmful bacteria, which can grow rapidly if they're not stored and cooked outside of the temperature danger zone, which is 41 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. They include foods from animal sources. So think of these as like your typical foods that you would want to refrigerate and make sure they're cooked well. Your meats, poultries, fish, dairy, and eggs. Also foods from plants that have been cooked. So tofu, which comes from soy, beans, and cooked vegetables. Also fruits that have been cut, like melons and tomatoes, cooked rice or potatoes, garlic and oil mixtures, and sprouts. These can all harbor that bacteria. So there are many different factors that can be controlled to prevent bacteria growth. And then the acronym that we can use to memorize these factors is FAT-TOM. So the F stands for food, which is materials for the bacteria to eat. A stands for acidity, which means that the lower the pH or the more acidic a food is, they will have lower levels of bacterial growth in it. The first T is for time. So that's time within that temperature danger zone. And temperature is the temperature danger zone. That's the second T. And then O stands for oxygen. So oxygen is needed for a type of bacteria called aerobic bacteria to grow. And M is for moisture. So that refers to the water content of the food, and a lower water content of food prevents most bacterial growth. So bacteria can be classified as either aerobic or anaerobic, and aerobic bacteria grows in the presence of oxygen. So think of that as like E. coli in raw meats. And then anaerobic bacteria is something that can grow without oxygen. And that is something we're pretty concerned about in canned goods or in honey. So that is going to be things that cause botulism. So to minimize cross-contamination of bacteria from foods, we want to carefully store these TCS, time and temperature control foods. They should be sealed in bags or containers and stored separately, either in drawers in the fridge or in your cabinets. So we want to keep our ready-to-eat foods in the top of our fridge so that they cannot catch any leakage or runoff. And then foods with the highest internal cooking temperature are going to be stored lower at the bottom of the fridge or freezer, since they'll be at higher risk of contamination, but will be cooked to a high temperature to kill all of that bacteria that could have leaked onto it. So the order goes ready-to-eat foods at the top, raw fish, cooked meats, and whole meats. So think of whole meats as like a steak, because these have a lower internal cooking requirement than other meats, but they still need to be cooked, unlike those ready-to-eat foods. And then raw ground meats. Oh my goodness, raw ground meats will go next. So like your ground beef, ground turkey, sausages. So these will have a higher internal cooking temperature than those whole cut meats. And then at the bottom, the raw, whole, and ground chicken, because like we said, chicken is going to have the highest internal cooking temperature. Other food storage tips are going to be for foods that maybe don't necessarily need to be stored in the fridge or the freezer, but they're still at risk of bacteria or mold growth, or they can be contaminated by pests like mice or insects. So these are going to be things like grains that are rice, oats, and breads, and they should be stored in containers or bags that close, so that prevents the exposure to moisture and that contamination from pests getting inside of those bags. We also want to make sure we're refrigerating or freezing raw washed fruits and vegetables, as that can keep them sealed and preserve their freshness. And we can also use a sealed bag to do that. And then we always want to be mindful of our use by and expiration dates and not consume foods that have off odors or smells. So off odors and smells could smell sour, could be turning green, anything that is unusual for that food, as it can indicate that they've spoiled or had mold or bacterial contamination. All right, now I'm going to hand it over to Luke.
So now that you've learned about proper hygiene, bacteria of concern, and proper storage, now it's time to get into thawing and cooking. In this section, I'll be kind of going through this thinking like you're preparing food for either yourself or a large group of people. So most of my childhood consisted of showing up at home. I get a text from my mother saying, hey, throw that chicken from the freezer out on the counter, or the ground beef. I learned recently that that was very wrong of her to have me do, but it is what it is. And so 5 ways to thaw food properly: thaw food in a refrigerator, never on a counter. Submerge food under running water at 7 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 Celsius. And then it is important to note that the running water should be strong enough to wick away anything on the surface that may arise from the thawing process. Only thaw food in the microwave if it is being used immediately. Thaw food as part of the cooking process, or thaw vacuum sealed food out of the package and in the refrigerator. This is a new concern. With vacuum sealed fish, you create a perfect environment for Clostridium botulinus. It grows at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, which is not very warm, and it loves environments that it doesn't have access to oxygen. So whenever we're thawing vacuum sealed fish, especially out on the counter, you're exposing yourself to the potential of food poisoning. And this is also the same bacteria that loves improperly sealed canned goods. So our next step is picking a thermometer. First off, pick the correct type and size of thermometer. So for the type, the picture on the bottom right, this is a candy thermometer. It'd be very inappropriate to use this on a meat. Even though you probably could get a temperature reading, I would advise against that. Now, the one on the bottom left, this is a meat thermometer, which would be very appropriate for meats or other foods that we can put the entire sensing area, cover the entire sensing area. But if you're cooking maybe something large like a turkey, this type of food is much larger, and so this thermometer probably wouldn't be the best because it is not big enough, and that leaves us to the correct size. With these larger thermometers, it would be inappropriate to use a larger thermometer on something like a steak because the entire sensing area may not necessarily be in the product, and that goes the other way. Or I guess for the smaller ones, you can get the entire sensing area in the product, but it may not be able to go deep enough to get a correct reading. And then I've been mentioning sensing area. Every thermometer has a sensing area that is not just the tip of it. It's normally about the first 2 or 3 inches. And this needs to be fully submerged if you're like checking the temperature of water, fully in the meat to get a proper reading. Now we need to know how to calibrate our thermometer. So fill a glass with ice water, place the sensing area in the ice water without letting it touch the sides or the bottom, stir for 30 seconds before reading the temperature, and then the thermometer should read 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. If it does not read this, there should be a nut on the bottom of the thermometer that you can adjust to match 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius. And then for not letting it touch the sides or bottom of the glass, it's only 30 seconds, so I normally just hold it. You could, if you wanted to sit in there for a little longer, you could set something up to hold it for you. And before each time you use a thermometer, you're supposed to wash, rinse, sanitize, and then recalibrate it. But at this point, you're probably thinking, I don't necessarily follow these rules perfectly, and I'm perfectly fine, like never food poisoned myself or had any troubles with this. Whenever these rules are made for restaurants, because they don't know who's going through the door. It could be someone who is pregnant. It could be someone who's taking like a medication that's destroying their immune system. And so all these rules are set up to ensure absolute safety. But even though these were meant for use in a professional kitchen, we should still be following these at home. And so even though you haven't got sick now, you may get sick in the future if you continue to not follow these rules. And with the thermometer, after you've calibrated it and done all this, it's supposed to test it. We test the thickest part of the meat, and then we test 3 different spots. If you're in an apartment like I am, I have a builder's model for a stove. It cooks very uneven. And so this is really important for me to follow. And even good ovens can sometimes have this issue if you overload them. Or stovetop, sometimes the side of the pan can get too hot compared to the other, and it can cause temperature imbalances. So it's good to test multiple sections. And sometimes if it's a big enough piece, you may even want to do more than 3 different spots. All right, so for ready to eat pre-cooked foods, we cook these to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And you may be thinking, well, they're ready to eat pre-cooked. Why do we need to go to 135 degrees? Well, for immune compromised individuals, pre-cooked foods are of concern. And so if you go to like a Subway or you go and buy deli meat, you really, to ensure absolute safety, you really should be heating these to 135 degrees healthy, if 35 degrees Fahrenheit. If you are not immune compromised, you're not as much risk because your immune system can, if you do get something, your immune system should be easily able to deal with that. But I'm not saying to avoid Subway, but it is something to take into account. For raw fish, cooked meats, whole pieces of beef, pork, or veal, that'll be 145 degrees. For whole pieces of beef or pork, that'd be kind of thinking like for a cow, a chuck roast or a sirloin, like a whole sirloin. And at 155 degrees, we do ground meats, except for ground chicken, at 155 degrees. Now, it is important to take into account if I go to Walmart and I get a steak and I decided that my last steak was not tender enough, and I start mechanically tenderizing it with like a fork by stabbing the steak over and over again, I am driving the meat deeper into the tissue. And this goes from a minimum temperature of 145 degrees to 155 degrees. So now we consider that as a ground meat. And then poultry, 165 degrees every time to ensure absolute safety. There's no question about it, especially if you're using a thermometer. You should never have any question whether it's cooked or not. And now it is time to learn how long we can hold these foods out for like cooking for other people and like a buffet sort of line. So for cold foods can be held up to 6 hours if it was held below 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 Celsius before being set out. If it is not allowed to go above 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 Celsius, or if it has specific instructions that need to be followed. For hot food, this can be held out for 4 hours if the food was kept above 135 degrees Fahrenheit or 57 Celsius or before being set out. If it will be thrown out after the 4-hour time limit, if instructions on package say otherwise. And again, with these, you have probably eaten food that have been setting out for longer than 4 hours that would technically not be safe. Someone who's not immune compromised can get away with this. It's not recommended, but when you're cooking for a group of people, again, you gotta, or even for yourself, you gotta keep this in mind, and this should be followed. So now it is time for another quiz.
So just like before, if you can go to kahoot.it, we're going to pull up the same quiz again and do like a little bit of a post assessment and see if maybe some of those questions you didn't know at the beginning, you're able to answer now.
Which meat has the highest internal cooking temperature? Chicken is the correct answer. Remember, bacteria of concern is Salmonella, and this has to reach 165 degrees to ensure absolute safety.
All right, and now what is the bacteria of concern for ground beef? E. coli, great job. Yeah, just remember that E. coli is an aerobic bacteria and it can grow in the presence of oxygen and be present in that raw meat.
Okay, and the third question, what is the best way to prevent viral contamination? Okay, good job practicing good personal hygiene. Again, with viral contamination, unlike bacterial contamination, we can't really kill it off with high temperatures. So that's where personal hygiene really comes into play.
All right, and now what is the temperature danger zone? Absolutely. The range where bacteria can live and grow rapidly. So remember that is one of the T's in our fat TOM. That is the factors that contribute to bacterial growth.
Which is not a time/temperature control for safety. Good job. Yep. Bread is correct because all the other options have bacteria associated with that will thrive if not under specific temperatures.
Okay, and our sixth question, what is the recommended temperature for water when washing hands?
Much faster this style. Me we learn.
Okay, great job. 100 degrees Fahrenheit is correct. And again, that's just when it's going to be better to be able to remove those germs, the oil and dirt off our hands without creating that discomfort.
All right. And when should somebody be excluded from handling food? So with jaundice, that is a sign of hepatitis A, and we want to completely exclude contact from food when someone's experiencing that. And then for the other symptoms, we want to avoid handling food if possible, but they don't on their own signal something as serious as Hep A.
What part of the meat should you test with the thermometer? Yep, the center of the thickest part because this is the part that takes the longest to cook. And remember, we also like to test 3 different spots on top of this.
All right, I'm back with the danger zone. What temperature is known as the danger zone for food? Yep, 41 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And a trick to remember this is you can think of 40 to 140.
Okay, and for our last question, ready to eat pre-cooked foods should be stored where? Got that right? And yeah, it's going to be the top shelf of the fridge because we don't want anything like raw meats to drip on top of them and possibly contaminate our food.
Right, let's see. Very good.
Yep. So today we learned how to practice good hygiene, how to not handle food for others if you are sick, how to properly store, thaw, cook, and hold time and temperature control foods, and how to calibrate and clean a thermometer. We also learned why all of these practices are important to practice at home, not just in a professional kitchen. And that should be all. Thank you for coming. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, a lot of great info. My husband, he is a big supporter of a meat thermometer. He has given everyone in his family a meat thermometer for Christmas before because he would ask the question, hey, is that, what'd you cook the meat to, or is it done? And they're like, I cooked it for 20 minutes. And he's like, that's not a good answer. So he has given everyone a meat thermometer because he is a very strong proponent of that. So great information today and a lot of good stuff. And I think absolutely excellent that you noted, when your mom told you, hey, throw some meat out on the counter to thaw. So many things in our past, how we've grown up, being told different stuff. So we have some great questions here. I was taught to not leave baked potatoes in the foil after cooking. Can I refrigerate baked potatoes taken out of the foil to save for the next day?
Yes, as long as it's not in that, because the baked potatoes are considered a TCS food, so as long as it's not in that set out for 4 hours with uncontrolled, with not controlling temperature, you can throw it immediately in the fridge or with as soon as you can after you get done baking the potatoes, and they should be fine as long as they go below 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, and we also just want to keep that bag sealed and take them out of the foil because the foil is going to hold that moisture in and it isn't going to get a tight seal to prevent other things from getting in.
Excellent. And should leftovers be refrigerated immediately or cooled first before they're put in the refrigerator?
It depends on the quantity. If in large quantities, what happens is if you like throw it in a large container and start refrigerating it, the center will stay warmer for longer. So you could potentially risk having extra bacterial growth. So I would probably point you to the USDA website to get specific numbers on that. But yes, sometimes I do say to split the portions up into smaller portions and then put it in the refrigerator, or to use an ice bath to cool it before it goes into the refrigerator. So that kind of just depends on the quantity.
Great
Excellent.
question.
Yeah, great question. Good info. And then I was told growing up that 3 days max of leftovers in the fridge, then you throw it out. Is this true? So kind of what is, after 3 days, the leftovers should just be thrown out, or kind of what's a good rule of thumb there?
I guess it just kind of depends on the food that it is. And then it's just so different with each foods, especially like with cooked meats or anything like that. It's kind of gonna depend on each one. I don't know what a general rule of kind of just keeping an eye on it, as you mentioned, make sure that it's not going bad. You can kind of smell it and see indications of it going bad. But I don't know if we generally have a general rule of thumb for all foods. It kind of depends on each one.
Yeah, I would say definitely if you're reheating at any point, use that sensory evaluation with the smell and the color, and then just make sure you're reheating it to that safe internal cooking temperature, and that should probably take care of what's in there. But I don't know if there is a hard rule. My family always said 1 week, but I feel like that's a big difference than 3 days.
Because some people do meal prep and that can stay in for like a week. It just depends on what you are cooking.
Ah, good stuff. And then sometimes I'll put a head of lettuce in a Ziploc bag, but I've noticed moisture gets inside. Is this bad? I know some I've seen throw like paper towel in with like a head of lettuce to kind of help absorb the moisture. What do you guys recommend?
I have used the paper towel trick. I think that it does help keep it moist, but you want to make sure you're also changing that paper towel to keep like a fresh one in there and get the moisture out so mold doesn't occur, and then wash your lettuce and produce before you eat it.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? I think I've caught the ones that have been put in the chat. Oh, here's another. How do I keep my fresh veggies from ruining in fridge? I seem to throw a lot away, and it's a waste. So not being able to go through those veggies quite quick enough before they start rotting, and then we have to throw them out. How do you keep them fresh for longer?
Yeah, we could always put them in the freezer, as you said. We're gonna want to control moisture kind of like that paper towel method that she mentioned. And then any other ways we can control it?
Some vegetables have specific storing like environments that they prefer, but I don't know them all off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's gonna depend. Honestly, the best advice is probably to buy smaller quantities at a time. But that isn't always practical. Freezing does not damage any of the nutrient quality. So if you feel like, hey, we've got a couple extra I don't know, zucchini or something, we could throw them in the freezer, like in a sealed bag again. I'm so sorry. Keep them sealed and keep that moisture out, even in the fridge. That can preserve it for a few extra days.
Also, who,
Yeah, go ahead.
also for some of these questions that we haven't been able to give as precise answers, ServSafe, USDA, and FDA should all be able to answer these if you go on their website to get more specific information for like if you prefer a type or if you're purchasing like specific vegetables that you have like specific questions about.
Excellent. And I'll make sure in that follow-up email to include those resources as well that people can go and check out for maybe some additional guidance there. Yeah. Let's see. I think we've covered all of the questions. But definitely if any others pop up, I'll include those resources that you guys have mentioned as great things to refer to look for some additional guidance. And thank you guys so much for this great info. I think definitely some things for us to put into practice now, keep in mind, and just to have a healthier kitchen for us and our families and our friends. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.